Hey guys, it's Holly here, and today I'm with Dr. Sue Devkota. She is based out of UCLA in California, where she is predominantly heading up the gut microbe and GI area. Is that correct?
Yep, that's correct.
Very cool.
Yep.
So obviously the gut microflora has been a super interesting topic. Lane and I get questions about this all the time. So we wanted to have one of the experts kind of come along and talk to us about this topic and how you can take away some information from today and apply it to your own nutrition practices, I guess we could say. So thinking broadly, Susan, do you want to start by talking about, I guess, what kind of encompasses the microflora? What are the roles, what's the function of the gut microflora, and then obviously how that relates into our health.
Yeah, absolutely. So the gut microbiome, as we call it, is mostly bacteria, so the bacteria that live in our gut, but it also encompasses viruses and fungi and protozoa, basically everything that's not human living in our gut. Our gut microbiome has evolved with humans as long as humans have been on Earth, and they evolve with us to carry out functions that we as humans can't do. We don't have certain enzymes, so our bacteria help us digest food. On a cellular basis, we have more bacteria in our gut than we do human cells in our body.
Yeah, that's incredible.
Yeah, so we actually are more microbial than we are human. And that's pretty astounding when you think about health and disease and what other things play into that from a health standpoint. I mean, we can't ignore that our microbes must be doing something for us.
First and foremost, outside of some of those important, functional roles, the gut microflora tend to act as a protection. It's like the barrier from entry between, external pathogens and things like that. So can you talk to us a little bit about the mucosal lining and kind of how it operates on a day-to-day basis, thinking about mucus and transfer of particles and things like that?
Yeah, absolutely. So as Holly said, I mean, our gut bacteria not only carry out functions in terms of producing metabolites, but they actually are kind of a physical barrier in many ways and contribute to the physical barrier. That's our mucosal lining in the gut. And some contrasting examples that kind of highlight how important this is we have a tool in research that are germ-free mice, and germ-free mice are raised from birth. They have no bacteria in their environment or in their gut. If you look at their gut is very immature even as an adult. They have a very thin mucosal barrier because they have no bacteria.
Right.
And so that in itself is proof that you need bacteria to have this thick mucosal barrier, and that's important because it keeps what's inside of our gut, from seeping out into our bloodstream and throughout our body. For the most part, we want, food byproducts, food antigen, things that can cause allergies. We want bacteria. We want bacterial byproducts to stay in the gut lumen. We don't want them to go in other parts. Yeah, in other parts of the body. And the single thing that controls that is the gut mucosal barrier. And what controls the gut mucosal barrier is the presence of beneficial bacteria in the gut. And we need those from birth all throughout life. And we actually have to pay a lot of attention to feeding the bugs and therefore feeding our mucosal barrier.
So looking at the things that can help to feed our bacteria, the first thing that springs to my mind is our dietary fiber and non-digestible carbohydrates. Could you talk to us about, what is specific for, optimizing our health when it comes to fueling those bacteria through non-digestible carbohydrate?
Yeah, absolutely. Fiber is not the sexiest topic to talk about in the world. I know it's like I wish I had some cool new supplement to say that this will promote beneficial bacteria in the mucus, but it really is fiber, and fiber is actually a very dynamic component of the food system. It has many properties. As Holly mentioned, there's digestible, there's non-digestible. They both serve purposes, and even within those categories, there's types of fibers that have essentially bioactive properties because of their effect on the gut microbiome. And you need all of them. Just eating, all Metamucil isn't going to be good for you. You need to eat a diversity of fibers because different bacteria thrive on different fibers. So you need to actually feed the different kinds of bacteria through the different fibers.
So if you're eliminating, so there are a lot of different diet types out there that people are following at the moment that are quite restrictive of certain food groups. So I can imagine that in itself, if you're eliminating a whole food group, whether it be, grains or, dairy, whatever it is, you're kind of going to then affect the types of bacteria that are, growing in your gut. And that obviously isn't a good thing in some cases, right?
Absolutely. I mean, you think it's almost a direct correlation. The amount of diversity you have in your diet equals the amount of diversity you'll have in your gut. If you cut something out, you're going to lose some bacteria. So it's a very direct relationship. And you have to nurture it. It's like a garden. You have to grow your garden, give it fertilizer, give it sunshine. Your gut microbiome is the same thing. So you need plants, but an all vegan diet isn't going to give you the same diversity. You need some protein, but a carnivore diet isn't going to do it either. You need everything in there as much as you can consume. That's that you enjoy eating, but you need diversity in your diet.
Right. Let's look at some of the good and bad bacteria. Now I know it is not the best way of thinking when it comes to certain types of foods. We don't want to label things good and bad, but there are certain bacteria that we know that are kind of pathogenic and they don't really have a great effect on our overall health. What are they? What are the different types of those bacteria? And what do we know from a dietary standpoint that can affect the growth of each of those cultures?
So we're all somewhat familiar with the salmonellas, the E. coli's that contaminate food and that are responsible for some of the lettuce recalls and things like that. But we also have to recognize that we also walk around with E. coli in our gut. It's one of the most prevalent bacteria. So there's many different types of E. coli. So we kind of put a label, slap on the pathogenic label, but they're not all harmful. We actually walk around with sort of opportunistic bacteria that could be good, neutral, bad, all the time. We have them. And so what it really comes down to is what foods are we eating or what are we putting into our body that will promote the growth or suppress the growth of those pathogenic bacteria. We had done a study where we knew, okay, if we shifted the diet towards a highly saturated fat type diet, we could actually promote the growth of one of these opportunistic bacteria that we all have. But in this context, it promoted its growth and sort of suppressed some other beneficial bug. When it bloomed, it caused an immune response in the gut that caused colitis, essentially.
Now, was this in humans or?
This was a mouse diet, mouse study. So there was always that caveat, but it was the best way that we could sort of control the study initially. There have been many follow-up studies in mice and in humans, and have shown that similar types of diets can still promote the growth in humans. So this bacteria is also present in humans. That's just one example.
Right.
And I think that again, going back to this concept of diversity, as long as you have diversity in your diet, you have the best chance of sort of maintaining balance and homeostasis and sort of preventing those bad bacteria to bloom. We talk about perturbations in the gut microbiome, and so antibiotics is one of the most obvious perturbations. But shifting your diet dramatically can also be a type of perturbation.
Right,
as well.
And that was actually the next thing that I wanted to talk about was the use of antibiotics. How do you feel about people just kind of being handed out prescriptions willy-nilly for perhaps things that aren't so necessary? And if they are taking an antibiotic, how can that be detrimental to our gut microflora?
Yeah, I have very strong feelings about antibiotics. I actually believe the world is going to end because bacteria are going to take over.
Take over us. I have that thought too sometimes.
Because it's also interesting. It's very regional in terms of how doctors prescribe antibiotics. Certain regions of the country are very liberal with antibiotic prescriptions. Some won't give it to you unless you're on your deathbed.
Right.
I believe in very prudent use of antibiotics. Definitely, I think prophylactic use of antibiotics is one of the worst things. And by that, I'm talking about you're going in for oral surgery or getting a root canal and they give you antibiotics, I would not take it.
So if it's elective,
probably
choose not to, is what you're suggesting.
Yes, if you're comfortable doing that, I'd strongly encourage it. But if you've got an infection, oftentimes only an antibiotic will cure that. And we need to reserve antibiotics for those times, otherwise they'll stop working. If we're just taking them when you really need it, they won't work anymore.
Right.
And so we really need to be careful about how often we use them and for what. Don't use them for viruses, they don't work.
So obviously, if you're taking an antibiotic regularly, that can then interfere with the natural flora that is growing.
Absolutely. Not only are you killing the potentially bad bugs, you're killing all the good ones off too, and you may not recover them fully.
Yeah, and on that note, so thinking about recovery of certain types of bacteria in the gut, we were talking earlier about some of the studies that look at passing on the gut bacteria to their offspring, particularly in studies in some mice. We've seen this in their pups. Do you want to mention quickly kind of how that works?
Yeah, fascinating study. It was really focused on the fiber and how if we stop eating fiber, reduce our fiber intake over generations, we can actually lose certain bacteria. So in this study, they fed mother mice a high fiber diet. And then with each generation of pups that she had, they were on essentially a fiber deficient diet. So the first generation was, very low fiber, next generation, very low fiber. By the fourth generation, still very low fiber. They tried to cross over and feed fiber back to that fourth generation to try to recover the microbes to make them look like the mom. And what they found was no matter how much fiber they fed the pups, they could no longer recover any of those original microbes. So it proved that you can, through fiber reduction or elimination, some of your bacteria can actually go extinct.
And what does that mean for the everyday person and as far as our health?
What it would mean is that if you deprive yourself of sufficient fiber, remember mice lifespan is much more accelerated. So in a single human lifetime, you could probably actually see the same effects where if I today stopped eating fiber and then I looked at my microbiome 20 years from now, I probably will have lost permanently certain microbes from my GI tract, and they're generally beneficial microbes. So we need to keep fiber in our diet and more than we're eating today.
Because I think, with the changes in those fiber, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I have seen that there is some literature that kind of suggests that that change in microflora can actually impact, certain disease state risks. So things like cardiovascular disease, diabetes, certain autoimmune conditions. If we start to see drastic changes in our, our gut microflora, is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And the reason being that our bacteria, fiber is food for the bacteria, and the bacteria then metabolize the fiber and they produce short-chain fatty acids. And those short-chain fatty acids are actually what maintains the gut barrier and the gut epithelial layer. And so for our gut, like our actual gut cells, they consume short-chain fatty acids, and they only come from bacteria. Bacteria can only make them if we feed fiber. So we need fiber for the whole chain of events.
Right, so obviously over time, if you restricted that from the bacteria, then that mucosal layer is getting thinner and thinner, and then we're potentially allowing for greater entry of other things we don't want in our bodies, right? Which can then relate to those certain health, chronic diseases.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. The other thing I wanted to touch on is the consumption of things like artificial sweeteners, even natural non-caloric value sweeteners, and how that can play into our gut microflora. And is there any negatives from consuming a high consumption of these? And I actually bought in a few of the products that I know I certainly use being a competitor. So I bought in some of the Walden's Farms toppings. These are all non-calorie value. There's a variety of different artificial sweeteners and natural sweeteners and flavorings and things in here. And then also some of these fiber noodles, which are super popular for bulking up and providing fiber.
Right.
What is your opinion about these artificial and natural non-caloric value sweeteners and things?
I think some of the products are kind of brilliant and are really creative ways of using, like this. I think it's a pretty brilliant product because it's using something that's a food product in Asian cultures, and your body just doesn't use it, but it's not necessarily artificial. With the non-nutritive sweeteners, artificial sweeteners, it really, I think, ultimately comes down to how much you're consuming. Inherently, I don't see any problem with them in terms of the gut microbiome, because it's, again, you always have to look at the bigger picture, and are you getting all the other stuff right? Are you getting your macros right?
So you think that if you're consuming a lot of these products, provided the rest of your diet is still, there's a lot of variety, you're consuming all food groups, a good amount of fiber, then they're okay as far as our gut microflora.
I believe so. If your diet is balanced and diverse and you're getting your fiber, having your pancakes with some of this on the weekends, I see no problem.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, there you go, guys. So that is all the dieters out there are feeling a little happier about the fact we can still continue to use these products. Is there anything else that you can think of that you would like to kind of get the message out there to our audience? I know there's a lot of people that probably are symptomatic and have a lot of GI discomfort, and a lot of the time people look to foods, and food restriction sometimes is unnecessary. Do you have anything that you would like to talk about in regards to that?
Yeah, I think it's what we know in the microbiome field is that diet is the thing that determines your gut microbiome composition. So if your gut is feeling off, or you've got diarrhea, constipation, bloating, it's usually likely a microbial imbalance, a microbial problem. And it could also be stress levels and things like that, but oftentimes there's some microbial component. And usually it can be somewhat mitigated by food choices, but it requires a lot of discipline and a lot of paying attention to the foods you're eating and paying attention to your body. So I'm a huge fan. I'll make a plea to people for diet records and keeping track of what you're eating when you feel these symptoms, because the person who's going to help you, whether it's your doctor, your dietitian, your naturopath, whoever you see, needs this to help you. So food records are critical, and they'll help you learn about your microbiome. Another thing I'll say is, if you have an opportunity to get your microbiome tested, to get it analyzed to see what microbes you have, do it. I highly recommend it, to have it as a baseline part of your health profile, because even if you're healthy, have your baseline, because one day we won't all be healthy or we'll have a GI problem. We actually have a comparison for when we were feeling good. So I encourage that.
Awesome. So I actually will be putting up a video and an article in the coming weeks, so stay tuned for that, which will look at some of the diagnostic testing that we can do to kind of determine what some of the problematic conditions might be if you're somebody that is experiencing GI upset, because there are a whole host of serious conditions that we want to make sure we eliminate first before we start looking to food sources. So keep an eye on that. You mentioned that you would recommend people getting their gut bacteria tested. Is that something that you in your lab can kind of facilitate?
So we do it in our lab, but doing it in a research setting can be slower than most consumers,
have the patience for,
immediate gratification. But there are many companies now out there who offer microbiome testing. They essentially send you a kit and you send them back. It is poop, so you have to be comfortable with that. But it's a very small poop sample, totally worth it. And they'll send you everything you need, so you don't have to touch it, and you ship it back. And usually within 3 weeks, you get a profile. There's one that I know out of UCSD is called American Gut. You can look them up online, but there's many others, and all of them essentially use the same technology to analyze your microbiome. So I would say start with the one that you're comfortable with. You can Google it. They're out there. They're all fine.
Perfect. Yeah. If we want to be able to get in touch with you or see what you're doing in regards to research, where can we find your stuff on social media and even websites? Do you want to let the viewers know?
Yeah, absolutely. You can follow me on Twitter. I all my science updates in the microbiome field and the gut health field, sort of what we're doing in the lab, is all on Twitter. So my handle is Suzanne_Devkota. And that's probably the easiest. I also have a lab website, www.devkotalab.com.
Great, and we'll pop all of that information in the description below so that you can go and check that out. Thank you so much for popping in and having a chat with us today. I really appreciate it. I hope you guys take something away from today's video, and if you have any questions, make sure you go down and add a comment. We will do our best to kind of get back to you and answer any questions that you have. And of course, stay tuned for the articles that we're putting out on our GI and all things related. So thanks again, and we'll look forward to next time.
Thank you.
Cheers.